The Teal mask portion of the Scarlet and Violet DLC is less than 2 weeks away, and honestly, I will admit I am pretty excited for it. Last week, I did a video on the top 10 Pokemon that should have been in the Scarlet and Violet Teal mask, and I covered the Pokemon that were unfortunately not making it. Today though, I want to talk about the lucky bunch that did make it with the top 10 Pokemon I want to use once the Teal mask drops. Some of these mons, believe it or not, I have never used in a playthrough before, to my knowledge anyway. Most of them I have used though, and I am excited to use them again if I decide to make that choice. However, I do not know whether the Pokemon in this set of DLC are gonna require me to beat the main story first, because I do want to do a fresh playthrough with these brand new mons introduced in Scarlet and Violet. Regardless, if I have to capture them in my beaten copy and lay eggs of them, then so be it. That's not really an issue. I am, however, a little worried about the best team, but I did create best teams for Sword and Shield's DLC, so I think I'll be good. Anywho, I'm stoked to get into this list, so let's do it. Starting off this list, we have a Gen 1 mon coming in, and I have actually used this mon before. Arbok is a pretty dope Pokemon. I just love snakes in general, and Arbok is definitely no different. I've also had the idea of doing a mono poison run in my head for quite a while now, and with Arbok coming in, it kind of gives me the motivation to do it. Arbok is not a very good Pokemon, let's be honest. It never really has been. It still does have a more or less alright move pool though, with the likes of the Elemental Fangs, Earthquake, and a decent stab with Gunk Shot or Poison Jab. I think the last time I used it was in a run for Heart Gold and Soul Silver a while back. I hope that Arbok gets at least a little buff from this DLC patch. Maybe some new moves, or maybe even some magic via Terra choices. Still, I love its design, and I always will be an Arbok fan. Another mon I haven't used in a long while is Noctowl. I've used it plenty of times in Johto runs, but what I love about it is the access to some psychic attacks it has. Sure, it's not exactly the most ideal flying type to use, but that doesn't mean it's not fun to use. Kitakami gives off hardcore Johto vibes, and it gave me the drive to use Noctowl again. What disappoints me though, is the fact that we could have had a Paldean version of the Hoot Hoot line. I have been asking for years to get some kind of regional variant for the Hoot Hoot line. With its psychic type move pool, we could have had like a cosmic kind of looking regional variant. Even if we aren't getting a regional form though, I have to say I still am excited to use one. Did you also know that Noctowl got access to Moonblast in Gen 7? I legit forgot about that until writing this video. I'm gonna make this short because Clefable is heavily talked about on this channel. I love Clefable. You guys know that. Competitively, it's gonna bring some ferocity to the singles meta. In-game wise, I'm also stoked. I love Clefable's move pool access, its stats, pretty much everything about it. I've used Clef so many times in competitive and playthroughs, I've been using it since the days of Red and Blue, not gonna lie. And I did crack a grin when I realized that the Clefable line was coming back. For me, it's a nostalgia mon, and I'm sure a lot of you also share that sentiment. I will always love this pink fairy menace, and I'm stoked to potentially use it on my team and in the competitive meta. Mamaswine is one of the best ground-type Pokemon in existence, and regardless of how many times I've used it to slay in competitive, I've only used it in-game a few times. It's probably because in the most notable games it appears in, it's more late game, and most of the time I really don't use late game mons all that much. However, with Scarlet and Violet, it's different. I'm pretty positive I'll be able to get a Swinub pretty early on and have it from the get-go. This strong physical attacking Manny will be the superstar on my team if I do decide to use a ground type. Although there's another ground type mon that I'm leaning a little bit more toward, which I will get into very momentarily. But it did do extraordinarily well in my Heart Gold and Soul Silver run I did a little while back. Ground and Ice is an amazing type combination, and with those stats and the move pool access it has, Mamaswine does well anywhere it goes. this Pokemon kind of caught me off guard. Gligar's coming back, and I'm all for it. This was also the Pokemon I mentioned that I'll be talking about momentarily. So why Gligar and not Gliscor? Well, I've used Gliscor plenty of times in competitive, and even in some playthroughs of Pokemon Platinum, but I have never used just Gligar before. As I mentioned in the top 10 Johto mons I've never used before. Yes, I've used it in competitive, but not for in-game. It's solid for a non-fully evolved mon, and it also has the great typing of ground and flying, which is only weak to water, and unfortunately has a quad weakness to ice. However, for in-game, that quad weakness doesn't mean much. Also, quote me if I'm wrong on this, but the Eviolite should be obtainable at a decent point in the game. Whether or not that's at the beginning, I don't recall, because I never had to use one. But having an Eviolite Gligar in a playthrough is a perfect defensive mon. Of course, I do think Gliscor is better, but Gligar is underrated in the sense of using it in-game. I've always had the idea of only using fully evolved mons for playthroughs, and if my mons weren't fully evolved, I always had the feeling that my team felt incomplete in a sense. That's just the way I've always played Pokemon. I've never used the non-fully evolved Pokemon on my team before. Unless we're talking Kadabra, because that's just an entirely different case. I mean, look at its stats. Gligar is a fun ground type to use though, and I want to give it a go. I talked a lot about this beast in my most recent video about the top 10 Pokemon that should have returned in the Teal mask. Though it is returning, I could not be quiet about it. Adaptability knockoff hypes me up a lot. Regardless of competitive though, I've never used Corefish in-game before. I've swept in competitive, but never in-game. Also, egg moves have become much easier in Scarlet and Violet, which means Corefish gets Aqua Jet at a very decent point in the game. This means you don't have to wait until level 34 to get a decent physical water move. In our case, Razor Shell. That is if its learned set is anything like its Sword and Shield one. It does stink that adaptability is its hidden ability, but for me, I'm just gonna lay an egg of a hidden ability Corefish and go from there. Its other abilities aren't too bad though, and 120 base attack even without adaptability is still phenomenal for an in-game run. I need a solid water type for my team, and Crawdaunt may be the answer, but we'll see very soon. Yanmega is one of those mons I actually enjoy to use. It's weird, and I don't get it, but I prefer using Yanmega in Gen 4 versus the later gens. I don't know, it's just always been like this. Maybe it's the sprite following you in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, or even just the front and back sprite. The move pool in these gens isn't the greatest, but I know as the gens go on, the move pool of course does improve. And what I mean by that is it getting Bug Buzz at an earlier level. For example, in Legends Arceus, Bug Buzz can be learned at level 43. Yanmega is still a good mon though. Tinted Lens and Speed Boost are solid abilities. Overall, I think Yanmega is underrated nowadays, and its design makes me miss using it more because it is the Dragonfly Pokemon. Flygon, I'm sorry, but you and I both know it's true. It would be cool to see it following me around through Paldea too, just like in Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Just hopefully the model can keep up. Up at number 3 is another Hoenn water type, being Milotic. What usually turned me off about using Milotic was the rarity of Feebas and the evolution method of getting it. Nowadays though, Milotic is a lot easier to obtain, and I'm sure in Scarlet and Violet it will be the same procedure. Milotic is an amazing bulky water type with such an incredibly gorgeous design. I've used it before, but it's been a pretty long time. I think it was actually back in Generation 6 in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, but it still did take me a little time to get it. I don't know when the Prism scale will be available, but if I can have Milotic in the very beginning of the game, Scarlet and Violet will be way easier than it was before. The cool thing is move relearning is much easier in Scarlet and Violet, so Milotic will have Water Pulse right when it evolves. Milotic is gorgeous, and I think it's a for sure spot on my team versus Crawdaunt, but we'll see. At the penultimate spot is a brand new Pokemon, being Diplin. I wasn't particularly in love with the Applin line in Sword and Shield, but Diplin did pique my curiosity. It's more so giving a Pokemon a chance that I've never given before. Grass and Dragon is a dope combo, but it does come with a few weaknesses, even a quad weakness to Ice. Just to be clear, this is a third branch evolution for the Applin line, right? Like a completely separate one. For an evolution, it doesn't really change much when you compare it to the likes of Flapple and Appleton. It's rather interesting, honestly. Not gonna lie, too, it looks kinda tasty. Caramel apples are quite delicious, not gonna lie. Not that I'm eating Pokemon, but you know what I mean, right? Also, how is its ability Super Sweet Syrup gonna work for competitive singles? Evasion Claws is a thing. So does that mean that ability is going to be banned for it? I'm not sure what's going to happen on that front for singles. At number 1, I'm going to say this is definitely going to be a very odd curveball to some of you. Number 1 is Dusknore. Yeah, I know, random. I've never used the Dusknore line before. I don't know why. I kind of just forgot it exists sometimes. Don't get me wrong, I've used Eviolite Dusclops many of times in competitive, and even draft format once. It's a very bulky Pokemon with the Eviolite, and with the likes of Will-O-Wisp, it's even better. You can practically run whatever moves you want too. The Elemental Punches, Power-Up Punch, Rock Slide, etc. But before I rant too much about Dusclops, I want to talk about Dusknore. I've rarely used this mon in competitive, and from what I can see, it's kind of fun to use, not gonna lie. But I've never used it in-game before. This Phantom Pokemon honestly has a sick design, accompanied by some disturbing yet fun Pokedex entries. Like Dusclops, it's got that deep move pool. And also like Dusclops, it has great defensive bulk, although you can't use the Eviolite this time. Plus, it's got a solid base 100 attack stat. The fact that it's a trait evolution does make it a tad harder to use, but I have Switch Online, so that's not much of an issue for me, but it could be for you. Also, one thing I want to point out is the Explorer games from the Mystery Dungeon series. They really capture how devious Dusknore was, and in a way, it made me love it as a Pokemon even more. It really captured what it's meant to be in those sets of games. Yet, I've never used it before. I need to fix that. Well, that wraps up the top 10 Pokemon I want to use in the Teal Mask DLC. I'm pretty stoked to play these games again with these set of nostalgic Pokemon coming back. I still haven't decided on a team yet, but now I have a more general idea of what I want to use thanks to this video. Heck, I may not even use any of the Paldean starters, but we'll see. Anywho, what Pokemon do you plan on using in this set of DLC if you do plan for another playthrough? Let me know your thoughts down below.